The kitchen felt colder than usual on that Tuesday evening in November. The clock ticked loudly as Ethan sat at the table scrolling through his phone, pretending to be interested in work emails when really he was just avoiding conversation with Claire, who was aggressively washing dishes with more force than necessary. Frustrated, he could hear the clink of each plate hitting the sink like she was punishing the porcelain for something it never did. 12 years of marriage had brought them to this place where silence was easier than words and distance felt safer than closeness. Claire dried her hands on the towel and turned to face him. Her eyes were red and tired, showing signs of the countless nights she had spent lying awake thinking about how they had become strangers sharing the same bed, voice trembling. "Do you even remember what we talked about last week?" she asked him. Ethan looked up from his phone and felt his stomach tighten. He did not remember last week, felt like a blur of work stress and coming home too late to actually engage with his wife. Sighs. "I remember. Something was important, but my boss kept me late with that merger," he said quietly, knowing it was a weak excuse. For the past 6 months they had been arguing about everything and nothing at the same time. Ethan felt unheard and unappreciated, as if his efforts to provide for them meant nothing to Claire. She felt invisible and overlooked, as if the man she married had chosen his career over her. The affection that once came naturally had become forced and awkward. Their kisses were brief, their hugs were shorter, their conversations had become transactional rather than intimate. Nervous, Claire walked to the kitchen counter and opened a drawer, pulling out an envelope that had been hidden underneath the utility bills. The papers inside were crisp and official, and they seemed to change the entire atmosphere of the room. Gasping, "What are these?" Ethan asked, though deep down he already knew. Claire took a deep breath and her hands trembled as she placed the divorce papers directly in front of him on the table, voice trembling. "These are divorce papers," she said loudly. "I have tried everything, Ethan. I have tried talking to you, I have tried marriage counseling suggestions, I have tried being patient and understanding, but you are never there. Even when you are physically in this house, you are somewhere else mentally and emotionally." Shouting, "I cannot do this anymore. I cannot pretend that everything is fine when I know in my heart that we are dying." Crying, "I need you to understand what losing you would feel like. I need you to wake up and see what we are about to lose." Ethan stared at the papers. His initial reaction was shock, then anger, then something else entirely. He felt like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. He expected this might happen someday, but having it actually materialize before him made everything feel too real. Claire stood across from him, waiting for the explosion, waiting for him to fight back, waiting for him to show her that he still cared enough to battle for their marriage. Nervous, she wanted him to cry or beg or do anything that would prove this man still loved her, but what happened next would change everything between them forever. Claire stood frozen, watching Ethan as he stared down at the divorce papers. His jaw clenched and unclenched, and she could see the vein in his forehead becoming more pronounced. Nervous, she had imagined this moment 1,000 times in her head, expecting him to explode or fall apart or beg her to reconsider. Instead he did something that terrified her far more than any anger could have. He reached for the pen that sat in the ceramic holder on the kitchen counter, the same pen they used to sign birthday cards and grocery lists. Gasping, "Ethan, what are you doing?" she whispered, but he did not respond. Whispering, his hand was steady as he opened the envelope and reviewed the first page. His eyes scanned the words methodically, as if he was reading a business contract rather than the document that would dissolve their marriage. Pauses. After what felt like an eternity but was only minutes, Ethan picked up the pen and positioned it above the signature line. Claire felt her heart racing, voice trembling. "Stop," she said, but her voice came out weak and uncertain. She had wanted to scare him into fighting for their relationship, but his calm acceptance of the papers felt like a rejection that cut deeper than any argument ever could. Crying, Ethan did not hesitate. He signed his name in the signature line with a fluid motion that seemed almost rehearsed, as if he had practiced this moment in his mind already. When he finished, he set the pen down carefully and looked up at Claire with eyes that were empty and hollow. Pauses. Claire expected tears, she expected rage, she expected him to tell her that she was making a mistake, that they could fix this, that he would change everything, but instead Ethan stood up from the table and walked past her toward the hallway, quietly. Without saying a single word, he left the kitchen and climbed the stairs to their bedroom. Claire stood alone at the kitchen table, staring at the signed divorce papers in complete shock, voice trembling. The silence that followed his departure was louder than any words could have been. It screamed of finality and surrender and something deeper that she could not quite identify. Crying, she picked up the papers with shaking hands and saw his signature bold and definitive at the bottom. His willingness to sign without argument felt like confirmation of something she had feared all along, that maybe he had already given up on them, maybe he did not love her anymore, maybe the man she married had already left long before she ever placed these papers on the table. Hysterical laugh. The bitter laugh that escaped her lips sounded foreign and broken. She had been so sure that the shock of seeing divorce papers would wake him up. Instead it seemed to confirm that he was already asleep in a place she could not reach. Pauses. Hours passed and Claire could not bring herself to move from the kitchen. She had the signed divorce papers in front of her and felt completely numb. Tired. Around midnight she finally climbed the stairs to their bedroom and found Ethan sitting on the edge of the bed staring out the window into the darkness. His shoulders were hunched and his entire body seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 regrets, sighs. When he heard her footsteps he did not turn around, but she could see his reflection in the window glass, and his face was streaked with tears, voice trembling, that he had clearly been hiding from her. Claire sat down on the other side of the bed, maintaining the physical distance that had become characteristic of their relationship. Nervous. "Ethan, I do not understand," she said softly. "Why did you sign without fighting? Why did you not say anything?" Whispering. Finally he turned to face her, and what she saw in his eyes was not indifference but profound pain and exhaustion. Pauses. "Because Claire, I signed those papers because I have already lost you months ago." Voice trembling. "Every day I come home and you look through me like I am invisible. Every time I try to talk to you about my day, you are scrolling through your phone. Every time I suggest spending time together, you have an excuse." Frustrated. Ethan stood up and began pacing the small bedroom, shouting, "Do you know what it feels like to feel completely alone while sharing a bed with someone? Every night I lie next to you and wonder if you even remember who I am." Voice trembling. "I have been emotionally checked out because you made me feel like I did not matter." Pauses. 6 months ago I stopped trying because trying felt pointless. You were always angry, you were always distant, you were always disappointed in me no matter what I did." Stammers. "I work hard, I provide for us, I love you, but somehow that was never enough." Claire felt her world tilting, gasping. She had not realized that her own behavior had contributed so heavily to his emotional withdrawal. She had been so focused on feeling neglected that she had not seen how her constant criticism and distance had pushed him away. Crying. "Ethan, I did not know you felt this way." Voice trembling. "How could I not know?" I asked him to sit back down, and they finally began having the real conversation they should have had months ago. Pauses. For the first time in years Ethan opened up completely, voice trembling. "I stopped believing that you loved me. I stopped believing that we had a future." Rushed. "Every argument felt like another reason for you to leave, and I began to think maybe leaving is what you wanted all along. So when you put those papers on the table, I was not shocked, I was relieved, because at least then everything would be honest instead of pretending." Whispering. Claire listened without interrupting and realized that her attempt to scare him into change had actually revealed the terrifying truth that he had already decided they were over in his heart. Crying. The days following their midnight conversation were painful and raw. Neither Ethan nor Claire slept properly, and the house felt different, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Tired. Claire could not stop replaying every harsh word, every criticism, every moment she had dismissed Ethan's attempts to connect with her. She realized that she had become so focused on what he was not doing that she had failed to see what he was trying to do. Voice trembling. Ethan, on the other hand, began to understand that his emotional withdrawal had been a form of punishment, a way of protecting himself from further disappointment, but it had only made things worse for both of them. Sighs. 3 days after the signed divorce papers were discovered, Claire found Ethan sitting in the living room in the dark. Whispered. "What are you doing here?" she asked him, and he looked at her with reddened eyes, voice trembling. "I'm trying to decide what comes next," he said quietly. "I have been thinking about us, about these 12 years, about whether saving this marriage is even possible, or whether we should just accept that some things end." Pauses. Claire sat beside him, and for the first time in months she reached out and took his hand. Gulps. "I do not want to accept it," she said, voice trembling. "I do not want to lose you. I know I have been cruel and dismissive, and I know I hurt you, but I also know that somewhere inside me I still love you." Ethan squeezed her hand. Pauses. But his face showed conflict and pain. "Love is not enough anymore, Claire." Frustrated. "I need to know that you are willing to actually change, to actually listen to me, to actually see me." Stammers. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. "I need to know that you care enough to fight for this marriage, not with drama or ultimatums, but with real effort and real vulnerability." Shouting. "For years I felt like you were criticizing me. Constantly, like nothing I did would ever be good enough, and I just shut down. I stopped trying because trying hurt too much." Claire felt tears streaming down her face. Crying. "I am sorry," she whispered over and over, but apologies felt empty without action. Nervous. That night they made a decision. Neither of them knew if it would work, but they agreed to try. Ethan found a marriage counselor, and Claire promised to work on her critical nature and her tendency to be dismissive. They both agreed to put their phones away during dinner. They both committed to having honest conversations, even when those conversations were difficult and frightening. Excited. It was not a guarantee of success, but it was a choice to fight for what they had built together. Over the next 3 months something shifted slowly and sometimes imperceptibly. They had sessions with their therapist where they learned new ways of communicating, where they practiced listening without planning their response, where they learned to apologize sincerely and accept apologies genuinely. Big laugh. One evening while cooking dinner together, something Ethan said made Claire laugh, giggle. A real genuine laugh that came from deep inside her, and Ethan looked at her with wonder because he realized he had not heard her laugh like that in years. Pauses. She looked beautiful when she was happy, and he realized that part of the reason he had shut down was because he had forgotten how to make her smile, excited. 6 months after Claire placed the divorce papers on the kitchen table, something remarkable had happened. The signed documents still existed in a drawer, but they felt like artifacts from another lifetime, like evidence of a marriage that had almost died but refused to. Pauses. Ethan and Claire had not only survived their crisis, but they were beginning to genuinely thrive again, excited. Their therapist had helped them understand that the breakdown in their marriage was not because they did not love each other, but because they had stopped actively choosing each other every single day, voice trembling. One evening Ethan surprised Claire by taking her to the restaurant where they had had their first date 12 years earlier, laughing. She was nervous, not sure what this meant, whether he was trying to be romantic or whether this was going to be another difficult conversation. Nervous. But when they sat down at the same table in the corner, he reached across and took her hand. Pauses. "Do you remember what you told me that night?" he asked her, smiling. Claire shook her head, and he continued, "I am going to spend the rest of my life making you happy." She had said that to him on their first date, full of hope and possibility. Voice trembling. Ethan pulled out a small box from his pocket, and Claire gasped, gasping. After everything that had happened, after the divorce papers, after the tears, after the months of rebuilding, he was proposing to her again. Excited. "I want to marry you again, Claire, not because of obligation or because we are comfortable together, but because I choose you every single day." Voice trembling. "I choose your laugh, I choose your strength, I choose to show up for you, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard." Big laugh. Claire was crying happy tears as she said yes, and when he slipped the ring on her finger, it felt like a new beginning. Excited. In the weeks that followed, they decided to do something unconventional. They renewed their vows in front of their closest friends and family, but this time their promises were different. This time they promised to communicate honestly even when it was uncomfortable. This time they promised to prioritize their relationship above their individual egos. This time they promised to never stop trying, shouting happily. The woman who had placed divorce papers on the kitchen table 6 months ago was a different person now. She understood that fear and ultimatums never create the change we desire, but vulnerability and honest conversation do. Pauses. As Ethan and Claire stood before their loved ones exchanging their new vows, she realized something profound. The divorce papers had not destroyed their marriage, they had actually saved it. Voice trembling but happy. By forcing them to confront the truth of their situation, by stripping away all pretense and comfort, they had been given the greatest gift. Sometimes we need to face the possibility of losing everything to truly understand what matters. Crying happy tears. The couple that emerged from that crisis was stronger because they had chosen each other not out of habit or fear, but out of genuine desire and commitment. Big laugh. Years later, when people asked them how they survived the near collapse of their marriage, Ethan and Claire would tell them the same thing: communication is not a luxury in marriage, it is a necessity. Selfishness disguised as self-protection will kill a relationship faster than any betrayal. Pauses. They learned that taking your partner for granted is a slow poison that creeps through a marriage, making both people miserable. They learned that criticism without kindness breeds resentment and withdrawal. They learned that true love requires daily effort and daily choice. Sighs contentedly. The most important lesson they gained was understanding that marriage is not something that happens to you, it is something you build every single day through honesty, vulnerability, effort, and an unwavering commitment to seeing and being seen by your partner. Pauses. The divorce papers that Claire had created as a tool to scare Ethan into change had instead become their greatest teacher, showing them both that the only way to save a marriage is not through manipulation or fear, but through radical honesty and the willingness to change yourself first. Voice trembling with emotion. They kept those divorce papers in a frame on their bedside table, not as a reminder of what they almost lost, but as a reminder of what they chose to fight for and what they would never take for granted again. Excited and happy.